Our gospel for today is from St. John chapter 8. To the Jews who had believed in him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves to anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" Jesus replied, "Very truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now, a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." All right. So, this was to get you used to the idea that I'm going to be over here. All right. How many of you know the Reformation polka?
Sorry.
No one? No one in this room knows the Reformation polka. Well, that's disheartening. We need to fix that problem. But probably we need to kind of talk our way through it while we're fixing that problem, because there's a lot of story packed in this polka. If you see up on the screen, when I was just a younger man, I studied canon law. While if it was a challenge, it was just to please my pa. They came the storm, the lightning struck, I called upon St. Anne. I shaved my head and took my vows, and Augustinian. All right, you heard Kathy's book. Martin Luther was born in 1485 to a strange family. Their name was Luther, not Luther, because apparently they couldn't afford an H until they went into the copper business. But when they went into the copper business, we could afford an H, and it became Luther. And Papa Luther wanted better things for his kids. He said, "Mart, my boy, you are going to be a lawyer." This was not the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth choice that Martin had in mind for his life. But, as the verse said, he did it to please Dad. So after 5 years and 2 degrees, he's a lawyer. And in 1505, he's coming back from somewhere, and there's this huge storm that we just heard about. And the lightning struck, and he called on St. Anne. St. Anne, by the way, is the mother of God. I guess you'd call her Jesus' grandma. But he called on St. Anne, and truth be told, every one of us has tried to make a deal with God at some point in our lives. You can deny it, but I know better. I'll give you one example. I promise, God, you get me through this test without failing, I will never again stay up all night playing video games. Something to that effect. There are more adult versions as well. The difference between when we bargained and Martin's bargain was he followed through. And as he says here, shaved his head, took his vows, and became an Augustinian monk. Julia, next slide, please. Yeah, you saw it. All right, we need to talk about some words here. Papal bulls are not quadrupeds of the male bovine persuasion. They are documents, official documents, and they're called bulls because of the wax seal at the bottom, which was called a bull. And the Pope had what he had to say written down and sealed it with wax, and it became a papal bull. Indulgences. Kathy just helped you remember what indulgences were. They were a great fundraiser for the church. They were essentially a get-out-of-hell-free card, only it wasn't free. You had to pay for it. Martin had some issues with that, as you may recall. Transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is the belief that when the priest says the magic words, the bread and the wine immediately change literally to body and blood. Martin had some issues with that. Our issues with that remain the same. We still believe that Christ is present in and under the elements, but not because of magic, but because Jesus said so. When he said, "This is my body, this is my blood," he is present with us in the meal. So it's, I guess, a technicality that we're still discussing with the Roman Church. And obviously, speaking one's mind was not a good idea because, as we heard, the Pope threatened and then followed through with excommunication, meaning literally he was no longer a part of the church. He was not a priest. He was not involved with the church. Out of here. We're done. Now, I'm going to invite you to join me with the refrain. It's similar to the verse. Papal bulls, indulgences, and transubstantiation. Speak your mind against them and face excommunication. Nail your theses to the door, let's start a reformation. Papal bulls, indulgences, and transubstantiation. Not bad for first time through. All right. When Tetzel came, Johannes Tetzel, anybody remember the scene on the train from The Music Man? Train full of salesmen out in the territory making sales. There was trains full of salesmen going out from Rome making sales of these aforementioned indulgences. And Johann Tetzel was the one who worked the area around Wittenberg, and he was apparently one heck of a salesman. He was very fond of saying, when the coin drops in the box, the soul rises to heaven. He was doing a really good job. Martin was not thrilled. So, if you wish to join me on this verse, feel free. When Tetzel came to Wittenberg, St. Peter's prophet sword, I wrote a little notice for the All Saints bulletin board. You cannot purchase merits for justified by grace. There's 95 more reasons, brother Tetzel, in your face. Oh, and you know this part. Papal bulls, indulgences, and transubstantiation. Now, Martin's writing all these tracts, courtesy of the printing business taking off in Wittenberg. They were very well received, and as he put it, they were all exemplar. The Pope, however, he had some issues. And as we just heard from the children's message, the Pope hauled him up before the emperor. And the emperor said, are you doing this? Really? And in fact, the Pope had about 41 things that he wanted Martin to recant. And Martin really couldn't do that because he had read in Scripture what he believed to be the truth. We still see today, sola scriptura. So, when it says, come on, recant, he can't do it. Feel free to join me. They loved my tracks, adored my wit, and all except the poor. The Pope, however, hauled me up before the emperor. Are these your books? Do you recant? St. Charles did demand. I will not change my diet, sir, for help me here I stand. And the part you know. Oh, papal bulls, indulgences, and transubstantiation. Speak your mind against them and excommunication. Nail your theses Now, Frederick is the prince of this area, referred here as Duke Frederick. He was known as Frederick the Wise. Now, Frederick was not anti-Rome or anti-church. In fact, he had a huge collection of religious relics, including some outstanding things like the true breast milk from the Virgin Mary. I heard titters. There should be. But he was a big fan of these relics. On the other hand, he was also a big fan of Martin Luther, because since Luther's arrival at his little university that he had only just started shortly before Luther came there, it had become quite well known. It had put Wittenberg on the map. And so he was, shall we say, a fan. And after this little problem at the Diet of Worms, when Martin is in trouble, you couldn't see the picture, but there was a kidnapping arranged by Frederick the Wise, and Martin was taken to Wartburg Castle, where he stayed under the name of Sir George. He grew out his hair and his beard, and he spent his time looking out over the mountains in a rather cold room, and this is where he started translating the New Testament from Latin, Greek, Hebrew into the vernacular, which for his area was German. So it was the beginning of the translation, as we also heard. So, feel free to join me. Duke Frederick took the wise approach, responding to my words by knighting George as hostage in the kingdom of the birds. Use Brother Martin's model in the languages you seek. Still up inside the castle with your Frederick and your Greek. Oh, papal bulls, indulgences, and transubstantiation. Speak your mind against them and face excommunication. Hear your voices to the door, let's start a reformation. Papal bulls, indulgences, and transubstantiation. There we go. A great deal of conflict began, lasting for many years, but in this period of time, Luther went on to write books of Concord, the Large Catechism, Small Catechism, many tracts, kept working on translation of the rest of the Bible, and, in all honesty, wrote some things that we today would not be so proud of, because racism didn't just start last month. And he was a product of his time and of the church in which he had grown up, where there was a great deal of, shall we say, dislike for the Jewish history that led to, let's see, Christianity. And here we have it. He also married Katie, who was a nun, and when the invasions of the convents and monasteries started, those people had to go somewhere. And a group of nuns from her convent escaped with some help, and ultimately, I think more on her decision than his, Martin Luther wound up marrying Katie, because she denied several other people who might have been interested. I think she was holding out for him. But it worked out okay for him, because she ran a household in the former monastery that was given for them to live in. And in there, they took in college students. At times, they would have 20-some people living there. She ran the household, ran a farm outside of town, and had time to brew beer. You know, the important stuff. You see that alluded to in the Raise Your Stein. This all worked out quite well for Dr. Luther, because I'm pretty sure he couldn't have run a household, much less a household, a farm, and a brewery. but he did some other things. Feel free to join me. Let's raise our steins and concord books while gathered in this place, and spread the word that Catholic is spelled in lowercase. The word remains unfettered when the Spirit gets his chance. So come on, Katie, drop your comment, come in our dance. Oh, you know what's coming, right? Paper bulls, indulgences, and transubstantiation. Speak your mind against them and face excommunication. Nail your theses to the door, let's start a reformation. Paper bulls, indulgences, and transubstantiation. And that's that. You didn't know that song? I'm not sure which chart that'd be on. I wonder. And that was the beginning, but not the end. Because the Reformation continues. Friday? I don't know, someday this week. I heard part of an interview with Bishop Eaton on NPR. Nationwide newscast talking about the Reformation. And she pointed out that 500 years ago, we were killing one another. So we've made some progress because now we're talking to one another, and we're down to we've got this little communion issue, and that's really the only thing we have left from being reunited into a Catholic church with the Roman Catholic Church and the Reformed Church. We're getting there. We're not there, but we're not there in a lot of other ways either. Because, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, the church is changing, and we don't know where it's going. And why would we? Because we're not in charge. All we can do is recognize that wisdom and direction doesn't come from people standing in front wearing microphones and in some cases, like I was an hour ago, an alb and all that stuff. Not that, we don't ever say anything useful, but it comes in the hearts and minds of all of our fellow believers, the priesthood of all believers, as we like to think of it. And we don't know where it's going. But we know this, that it must be able to change. It's a short poem. You could take a hunk of brown, moist modeling clay, squeeze it in your hands, and eye it oozing between your fingers like ribbons rolling out on the tabletop. Shape it into a dove or a fish or a water bowl, maybe throw it on a wheel and tacitly coax it into a vase or an abstraction of yourself. And then, having reshaped the Stoic block into sculpture, you have to decide. Put it in the kiln and fire it and preserve its beauty in brittle perfection, or keep it supple and soft, wet and moving, so that when the times require creative reformation, you can give thanks for the dove, the bowl, the vase, and then reimagine what this poetic mud can be, and spin it into a chalice or hand shape a plate and invite everyone to bring the bread and wine. Or get a camera and pose the earthly medium, flip the shutter once, repose, shoot again, and make this reformation into claymation. Animation of the potter spirit, keeping all things fluid, aquifying calcified statues like you and me and the church, and freeing our joints to be the art of God's desire. We can be brittle and break, or we could be open to God's reformation. 500 down. Let's see. Amen.